Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, an historic moment in the state of Pennsylvania. Guess what? The state of Pennsylvania takes over the city of Harrisburg, and then an important health care update, Pennsylvania politics and government, in depth and in detail. And guess what? It all starts right now.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, what a week it has been in the capital city of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, with the state passing legislation that literally would have it take over the operation of some functions of the government of the city of Harrisburg. We have two of the state's leading reporters who are going to weigh in on this and a couple of other subjects. Tony Romeo with KYW and KDKA Radio, and John Micek with the Allentown Morning Call. Veteran reporters all. You like that? Veteran reporters all. I like that. All right, Tony, I want to start with you. Look, this Harrisburg takeover thing is a pretty big deal. I mean, this has been in the offing for months. Give us some of the outlines of what occurred this week.
Well, the bigger deal is, of course, is the bankruptcy that the city council has been flirting with for some time and actually pulled the trigger on earlier this month. And, you know, in a parallel track, we've had the legislature moving to enact this takeover legislation because of the concerns of a move like that. So the governor has actually now signed the bill that was passed by the House and Senate.
Takeover.
They would essentially create a receiver. Many of the functions, decision-making of Harrisburg government will be taken over by a receiver who will be appointed.
Now, John, the functions, as I understand it, are limited to the fiscal recovery of the city.
It's paying bills, it's pension benefits, it's payroll, it's that kind of thing.
The incinerator deal.
It's selling off city assets like the parking garage, like the incinerator. I mean, the city is staggering at under $300 million in debt. It's just a truly psychotic amount of debt. And it now becomes one of a handful of cities in history to be taken over by state government.
But none, do either of you know, now I've been saying this, and you'll correct me, I went back and looked. Now, I didn't do one of those thorough exams that political historians are supposed to do. Do either of you know when this has happened before in the history of the state? Other states have done it, right?
I mean, there's been the so-called Act 47 thing where they come in and they set up financial recovery plans for troubled cities. But in actual takeover, Harrisburg is something like one of 40 cities in U.S. history where this has ever happened.
Right.
There's one in California, I think.
Orange County, I think, was
the other one.
Now, this has created, the tension on city council has been palpable, where you got, Tony, 4 majority city council people, as you point out, filed for bankruptcy. The mayor is opposed to it. Lawmakers are opposed to it. This thing is now in, what, federal bankruptcy court? This could be, and they're having a hearing, what, in a couple of weeks?
Well, it's pretty unclear as to how the takeover will affect the bankruptcy, because opponents, critics of it, say the bankruptcy motion is flawed on several levels. The mayor is opposed to it, as you pointed out. It's also stipulated in state law. It was put into state law this summer that the Harrisburg and other third-class cities couldn't do this until next summer.
Those that are in the fiscal recovery plan, I guess, Act 47.
And Jeffrey Piccolo, one of the architects of the takeover law, has said to me, at least, that he believes the receiver could simply withdraw the bankruptcy petition.
Now, John, this has become you've followed this. This is a national story. I mean, folks are weighing in from. Go ahead.
Yeah, and there's a lot of symbolism here on so many levels. For one, it's the capital city of Harrisburg, so it's not like it's a troubled city like Reading filing for bankruptcy and a takeover coming in. And there's a distinct symbolism to the capital city, and frankly, Governor Corbett and others have said it's an embarrassment to have this city go into receivership and bankruptcy. And you've got, frankly, not to put too fine a point on it, a group of middle-aged white men on Capitol Hill now moving to take over a majority African-American city. So there's some
that aspect of it,
there's some symbolism of it too. I mean, the nearest parallel I can think of, Terry, and I thought about this a little bit, is Washington, D.C. in the mid-1990s, where there's a board of control running the city's finances, and you had mostly elderly white Southerners overseeing the city's affairs. So there's a lot of symbolism and a lot of parallels here.
Yeah, I would just point out quickly too that I think it's become national news because of the economic climate. Even though I don't think that this whole issue is necessarily an outgrowth of that. This really has to do with an incinerator project and the debt associated with that.
It went awry. They upgraded the incinerator. they were going to make money off of it. Then the upgrades didn't go well. Do I got that right?
Basically, however much trash the incinerator took in, it could never keep up with the note. The financing was wrong.
So the debt is $300 million, and we're going to run to a break. I want to come back and talk about the big news on the transportation funding front. But the essence is we got a bankruptcy hearing coming up. Whether the state can file bankruptcy, that's been challenged, or the city can file bankruptcy. Then we have this takeover law. Within 30 days, if they don't come up with a recovery plan or agree to a plan, I guess, then there will be a receiver appointed that will actually handle the fiscal recovery. Is that right? And then we see where that all goes.
Yes.
All right, when we come back, transportation funding. It's been one of the 4 big items on the agenda of the legislature. Well, we heard a little bit from the legislature. Will we hear something from Governor Corbett? We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by ReconnectPA.org, supporting a comprehensive transportation funding solution, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back. Well, earlier in the summer, the Governor's Transportation Commission made a recommendation. As I think you know, we've done a lot of programming on this. The state has something like $1.7 billion a year in transportation needs. That would be fix the roads, fix the bridges. They're in a state of disrepair. John Micek, big news in the Capitol last week. What happened?
Yeah, basically Jake Corman, the Senate Appropriations Chairman, the Republican from Center County, in what can only be construed as a move to finally get the administration off the dime on this, came down to the Capitol press room with a bill that would implement a large chunk of the funding recommendations in the governor's transportation report. It's an uncapping of the oil company franchise tax, which is basically a tax on the wholesale price of gasoline. Motorists would be asked to pay more for their registration and their motor driving licenses. But they would have to do, the upshot of that is the renewal periods would be lengthened. That's one part of the findings.
Go ahead.
The background on this is that the Governor's Transportation Funding Commission released its findings in August 1st,
Was it in
I think
August?
it was.
August,
yeah. And subsequent to that, the governor has signaled that, well, he's looking at other things that beyond the recommendations, and that he was going to say something in the fall about what he wanted, whether it was those recommendations,
but here's
something
the point.
else, or a combination. But just very
ahead.
quickly, he indicated, he and his transportation secretary in like September indicated that because of the economy, they're not sure if they're going to come out and make a pronouncement about what the governor wants for transportation funding, and hence you have Senator Corman here trying to move things.
Okay, but here's the point. I'll ask both of you. John, the legislature is not going to vote to increase registration fees, whether it be, license or the registration fees, up the heat. Do the oil franchise tax unless the governor's on board. They don't want to put votes up, do they? They don't want members to put votes up.
No. John Rafferty, the chairman of the Senate Transportation Committee, said last week that he's not doing bupkis until he gets a clear signal from the administration on what they're going to sign and what they're not. This is a byproduct of all of the sort of stress and sewers that they went through during the budget season, where they got all this stuff queued up, including vouchers, and the governor stepped in and said, yeah, not so much. And so no one wants to do that kind of work until there's a guarantee that it's going to go.
Well,
you agree with that?
Well, yeah, and again, what's happening, what Corman said when he announced this, he was taking the findings and putting them in a bill form is, look, I want to just put this on the map, because he thought that people were going to come back in the fall and be talking about transportation, and they haven't. Again, largely because the governor has, for the moment at least, not come forward and said what he wants, and he wants to jumpstart the discussion. He
wants to jumpstart it, but any way you cut it, we're talking about, and this isn't arguable, I think everybody agrees, $1.7 billion. And they may not get 1 point. That was an earlier commission appointed.
2.7.
Oh, you think
it's 2.7 in the Shock report.
Okay, but earlier in a recommendation that but we're talking about. Let's say they could even get $1 billion a year. Let's say for the next 10 years. In and of itself, that would require the legislature and the governor to agree on raising fees and doing something about a tax, whether it be
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, there's no other way with the budget, is there?
Absolutely. I mean, this is the weird thing. This is everyone agrees it's a problem, and everyone agrees that something has to be done.
But
it's the getting from the agreeing, acknowledging that it exists to the actual doing of it where the problem is.
All right. In a couple of minutes that we have, the legislature has been debating, but they have not done things like a voter ID bill, which would require a state identification in order to vote. Now you have to supply identification the first time you vote, but after that you don't have to. And steeper regulations on abortion clinics. These are not high, not like sell the liquor stores, not like vouchers, but is there any movement, I'll ask you first, Tony, any movement on either of those at the moment?
Well, the House, of course, passed the voter ID thing, and it doesn't seem to be going anywhere in the Senate, at least for now. On the abortion issue, the House was supposed to take it up this week. They did not, because we're being told there is some sort of negotiation going on between Republican legislative leaders and the administration for some sort of agreement on that.
And you agree with that? Anything? Is this a question, John Micek, that even though the Republicans have these huge majorities, 112 to 91 in the House, 30 to 20 in the Senate, I think I'm right about that, they're not quite on the same page. Is that correct? Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, I mean, the analogy I keep using is that you ever been to Thanksgiving dinner? I mean, you've got people who are all related to each other sitting at the table, and nobody can agree on anything.
Are you Italian? You're not Italian. Tony and I know about
I'm
those,
Italian.
right,
I'm Italian on my mother's side, so
there you
that
go.
part manifests.
We'll let you at the table.
Well,
go ahead.
Go ahead, sorry.
No, but so the short form is that they're all related, but families don't agree on everything all the time. You've got this undercurrent of drama as well that last week in the pages of the Tribune Review, Mike Turzai, the House Majority Leader, came out and said that Senate President Joe Scarnati is in effect a tax and spend liberal who loves to, make deals, who loves to raise taxes, who loves to go into debt, which is like accusing somebody of being an axe murderer in Republican circles. And Senator Scarnati took some umbrage to this and has said, as I understand, that he's not doing anything until Mr. Turzai comes over and appropriately apologizes. So you've got a family feud.
30 seconds left.
Yeah, I'm just going to say that I think what you're seeing here is, in a general sense, what you're seeing is that the Senate Republican leadership is not as ideological and is more pragmatic than the House leadership is.
That's a good point.
And as a result, you have these 4 or 5 top big issues, but within those top issues, the leadership of each chamber has different priorities.
All right, great update. All right, healthcare, an important healthcare update. We got a couple of important topics to ask one of the experts we call in from time to time to help us understand these matters after we pay some bills.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back for our healthcare update. Joining me, as often is the case, is Dr. Stuart Shapiro. He's the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association. He's one of the experts that we call in from time to time. Okay, doctor, look, you wrote an editorial, or a column, actually an editorial piece in the Allentown Morning Call last month, and you were making some points about these cuts to Medicare and Medicaid and how they interact, particularly on the elderly. So let's sort of go through some of the points that you made in there. And I think and you tell me if I'm wrong, your basic point was that there's an interaction between Medicare and Medicaid programs that a lot of people don't understand, that when you start cutting one, it affects the other. Go ahead. Am I right about that?
You got that right, Terry.
Right.
In fact,
explain the details of that.
The subject is actually very critical, and it got picked up not just in the Allentown paper, but in Pittsburgh, in Philadelphia, in the Scranton area, in the Bradford area. The entire state's beginning to focus on the interrelationship between Medicare and Medicaid, as you rightly point out. Right now, for the elderly who are in nursing homes, for example, about 65% of those individuals are on Medicaid and about 15% on Medicare. because the state pays for care for the elderly under Medicaid about $20 less a day than the actual cost. The nursing homes are bringing in a lot of people for short-term rehab under Medicare.
Right.
So they've been under-reimbursed under Medicaid, and then we're able to stay in business because of Medicare.
Okay.
Now here's the rub. Under health care reform passed by Obama and the Congress, there were dramatic cuts to Medicare to pay for it. So they, in fact, enacted health care reforms on the back of the elderly and pulled a lot of money out of the system. Then, on October 1st, just a couple of weeks ago, Medicare cut payments to nursing homes by about 20% across the country. And in Pennsylvania, that pulled $300 million out of the system. And the net effect of this is that it's going to make, and it's starting to make right now, access to nursing home care for the elderly a real problem. And it's a problem because of these dramatic Medicare cuts.
All right, let me make sure I understand this. So your point is that because Medicaid payments to nursing homes were under the actual cost, it was being made up in part by Medicare payments for short-term care in nursing homes. And if they cut Medicare, that means that's additional pressure on nursing homes because of the lost revenue.
Correct.
And that's what you said.
And nursing homes, unlike other health care providers, whether it's hospitals,
right,
whether it's hospices, whether it's doctors, they are able to, because they have small numbers of Medicaid, deal with this issue.
But you have huge numbers of Medicaid.
And therefore, we're in a position now where the elderly are really having a problem accessing care. Now, in addition to all these cuts, we now have the super committee in Washington and the big deficit reduction. And it looks to me like they're playing a game of three-card Monte, like you and I played as kids, where we would shuffle the deck and we try to move things. But what's happening is they're going to make further cuts in Medicare at the federal level.
Right.
And even if they do nothing, there's going to be $500 million more pulled out of the system by an automatic cut in Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania's lucky. Senator Toomey, who's very smart, is on that committee.
Right.
But we hope as he is there that he will be fighting for the elderly of Pennsylvania to make surgical cuts, just like a doctor would, but not broad-based cuts.
Okay, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want to continue with this, but I want to get into another aspect of this, a change in the Affordable Health Care Law that was announced by the Secretary of Health and Human Welfare, HEW, and I want to talk a little bit about that. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Hi, welcome back. Well, the host mangled the title of Kathleen Sebelius. It's the Department of Health and Human Services. I threw welfare in there. But earlier this week, the Obama administration, apparently through the secretary, has given up on the Community Living Assistance Services and Supports Program, otherwise known as CLASS. And this is pretty important. It involves long-term insurance. And I want to ask our resident expert here, Dr. Shapiro, what does this mean? And it got some play in the news, and Obama may be walking back on that himself. What's this about?
Well, Obama realized that part of what the what the healthcare reform do is it created a non-sustainable program.
Oh, and that program was?
The CLASS Act, the long-term care insurance, because of the way it was structured in that legislation. And he pulled it back, and so now it's off the table. But that creates a big problem in America. If you ask the average elderly, and you're the expert on polls, who's going to pay for their long-term care needs, and 80% of the people are going to need it, they would say the following: Social Security, which won't; Medicare, which only pays for short-term rehab.
90 days, is that about right? Go
They might say Medicaid, and Medicaid's going broke trying to do this. Or their health insurance, and that won't. So we have a real problem of perception. The Class Act was a tiny baby step, and the way it was structured made absolutely no sense. From the beginning, you know, the president was right to pull it back. It was going to cost a lot of money, and it was unsustainable. But it does create a problem that America needs to address. And they need to figure out who's going to finance and pay for long-term care. The states have Medicaid.
Right.
In the previous segment, we talked about how it is unsustainable. Right now, the state of Pennsylvania is providing lots of non-mandated services to the elderly, which are not paid for, which are not necessarily, that don't need to be provided.
Give me one example.
Oh, the home and community-based services that are provided in Pennsylvania for the elderly, while very nice, are not required by the federal government. They're usually they're great service. They're usually provided for people who are not very sick. And I think in Pennsylvania what we have to do is prioritize our services to care for those that are really sick and in need of services. So
let me get this straight. You would go through and glean out those services that aren't essential and use that money to pay for the services that are essential. Is that basically your point?
Correct. That I would make sure that we prioritize the frail, the sick, the elderly, and I'd make sure that those services are delivered in an efficient way, of high quality, and that the Medicaid program reimburses or pays for services by rewarding or giving incentives to provide the service efficiently, which it doesn't now. On the other hand, as a national debate, we also need to look at this over the long haul and find a system, because it's unsustainable right now, and maybe we ought to federalize that.
We have about 45 seconds left. Tell me, I mean, is this something that has to be done solely at the national level? You said, is there something, for example, that you would go and sit down with Governor Corbett and say, Governor Corbett, this is what I'd like to do?
Oh, the governor now has the authority, with the legislature behind him, obviously, to fund as a priority elderly services to the sickest and frailest elderly, which they're not doing now. They're spending a lot of money on people who could have their families and others provide these services.
Great update. Good explanation. All right. Hey, as always, thanks for watching this edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and you always like this. Stay well.